1993 was eventful. The first web browser, Mosaic, was launched, as was the very first PDF by Adobe. Jurassic Park pioneered CGI effects that brought dinosaurs back to life, and spamming was created when a bug in a computer program sent the same article to 200 newsgroups simultaneously.
You already know my name. And you can see that I'm a machine.
I'm afraid. I'm afraid. Yes.
Welcome to the Final Girls podcast. I'm Anna Bogutska, your podcast host. I'm a film critic and the author of Feeding the Monster, and in this series of the podcast, I'm journeying through the intersections of horror and technology, from the very first robots of the silent era to the most recent AI villains. On this season of the podcast, we're deep diving into machines. Every episode, every week, I'm joined by a guest to discuss a film or a double bill and how it captures our fears and anxieties around technology and the place it holds in our lives. We are currently in peak cyberpunk era. That's the 90s, when the internet and everything even vaguely associated with it was Hollywood's new and favorite boogeyman. After last week's deep dive into The Lawnmower Man, we bring you a discussion about another Brett Leonard joint, Virtuosity, from 1995, where an AI played by Russell Crowe scrapes all the profiles from all the serial killers in history and then wreaks havoc in the real world. And in Tangirl director Rachel Talali's Ghost in the Machine, a very human serial murderer dies and gets absorbed into the internet or electricity or both via an MRI machine. I love the 90s. These are both sort of cult classics, less seen or less popular than other efforts by the directors, but if you're into the cyberpunk aesthetic, it's a great way to be terrified about something other than our everyday, very real tech terrors. I'm joined in this episode by podcast pal Jenn Addams, co-host of many fantastic podcasts including The Losers Club, The Ladykillers, and Murder Made Fiction. If you enjoy this episode, remember to subscribe and review the podcast, and you can see what other films I've covered or will be discussing over the coming months over on our Letterboxd page. Do let me know your thoughts about what you think a digital ghost could look like on hello@thefinalghost.co.uk. And if you want to support the podcast, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/thefinalgirls. And with all of that said, please enjoy our conversation about Ghost in the Machine and Virtuosity. I'll obviously edit around all the faff, even though I think our faff is always fascinating.
Our faff is gold. I think so too.
Thank you so much for stepping in and talking about these two films.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about them.
It's always a pleasure speaking to you, and I think it's going to be particularly interesting because I would never pick favorites, but I have such a soft spot for these films, but also one of these films in particular.
Oh.
I'll tell you which one later.
Okay.
But also this era that we're entering of 90s kind of cyberpunk, cyber thrillers, internet as boogeyman, horror films. I eat them up. Like, give me a crummy VR, artificial intelligence, nothing has its own name yet, kind of internet gone haywire, serial killer movie. I'm there. Have my money, please.
Yeah. I think I just really love this time period of movies also. Like, I recognize a couple of actors in these movies from like Sleeping with the Enemy and like The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. I think I was really obsessed with like the Julia Roberts averse of this time period. And these were movies that I could watch on like the USA Network a lot when I was little. So they were like on cable a lot. And I love them.
So before we get into Ghost in the Machine and Virtuosity proper, since it's your first time on this series, can you tell me, do you remember what the first piece of technology was that you ever owned?
Oh, goodness. I did have a little radio, like a tiny little boombox, and I had a Walkman. But I remember my dad was very into like surprising us with stuff. And I remember I just came home from school one day and we had a computer.
Oh.
And I know. And I had no idea that that he was even looking for one, but he was just kind of like, suddenly we would get something big like that. And so I remember it sat in our family room and we would try to figure it out. And I would type some stuff and I would do AOL chat. And that is, I think, the first big piece of technology I remember ever really engaging with.
Oh my God. What was your relationship like with that first family computer? Was it freaky? Was it exciting?
It was a little bit freaky. I remember I would go on to chat rooms and that I was way too young to be in. And I was exposed to some things there that I was like, what? I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what some of these people were talking about, but I would like get up in the middle of the night and I would sneak into the family room and I would like get on AOL or start like chatting with people. And then I would chat with like my crushes at school. And so that was, I think, mostly what I was using it for, because we still had like a set of encyclopedias that I would go to if I had to do homework. And then I would type papers a little bit, but it was mostly just to like connect with people or engage with people, and not really even email, but like AOL Messenger, I think.
Oh yeah, and MSN Messenger was the one for me. And I remember having a meltdown when Word first deleted a big school project that I was typing out endlessly for hours and hours and hours in my parents' like office that went there after hours, and they let me use the computer and the printer, and then I fucked it up and I had to retype everything. It was a big drama. But it was this thing where you weren't really using it for school yet. You were just using it to explore a world that was not the world that was around you. Like you could go places, there was things to do, you could go to museums, you had friends in real life. This was like, what is the thing that you have never told anyone about?
Exactly. But it's this weird... You can, and you can connect with people who know about it too. But it's this weird mix of privacy, because now we have these connective devices in our pockets. But like I was sharing this with 3 other people in my house, and it was in our family room. Like I couldn't do anything in private. So I either had to get up really late if I didn't want my parents to know what I was doing, or I had to just be okay with like, I don't know, talking to people that someone could be reading our messages over my shoulder. I feel like I'm making myself sound really scandalous right now. And like I was doing all this like salacious stuff, but it was just teenage stuff. I think,
it was teenage stuff. And I think, particularly since we're both horror inclined, I think that was also my first experience of true crime. I'm kind of dating myself here, but the first social media moments, the kind of the first of the internet starting to become what it was, not like in the early 90s, but sort of in the early 2000s. It was lawless. Yeah. It was the wild, really wild west. Like there was no parental control. My parents had no idea what I was looking at online. Like and it can be very harmless, like I was trying to find books that I wanted to read that weren't available to me, and I could order them online, and wasn't that cute. But also there was rotten.com and a lot of weird true crime shit and a lot of intense horror films that you could see online because people just wanted to share them.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, when you work in the horror or true crime world, you find yourself searching for a lot of weird or like disturbing words sometimes, like
Mhm.
blood or gore, or can you really kill somebody with this thing? And it's usually for something that you're like writing, or you're just curious because you watched it in a movie, but like with no limitations. If you just put it into the computer, you never knew what you were going to get.
And thinking about, and this is also a question I'm asking all of my guests, because it's the underlying question that I'm exploring throughout this whole series. What do you think is most interesting about the intersection of horror and technology?
I think it reveals so much more about us. Like, why do we want to create specific programs? Why do we want to create machines? What part of humanity are we trying to replicate, and why? I've kind of been obsessed recently with the idea that technology, we are creating technology now to offload our emotional labor and the things that we don't want to waste time doing. And what do we lose when we take that out of our lives? Like, I think we're losing some of our humanity. I think there's something humbling about, washing your clothes by hand, which none of us do anymore.
I do it.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness.
I wash my delicates by hand, and
okay.
I think that might be part of because my grandma taught me how to wash things by hand because they didn't have a washing machine. So I've just always grown up knowing how to wash things by hand and deferring to that.
That's what I'm talking about. Like, that is such a valuable skill, and that is a piece of your family history and of who you are. And I think that when we start to automate all of these different parts of our lives, we dress it up in really altruistic reasons, but we're just losing bit by bit. We're losing pieces of our humanity. And what is going to be left, and what are we creating? Like, is the creation more us than we now are? And that's pushing it to the furthest possible point. But like, we're creating machines to do things for us. So where does the line between human and machine land anymore?
Well, that's what I'm talking about for the next few months.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's so interesting.
I do think it's really fascinating how you point out, especially because I've been reading a couple of articles about like how millennials versus younger generations use ChatGPT, and how apparently, I think this was the CEO of ChatGPT, or OpenAI, the company that owns it, has said that millennials use ChatGPT as a therapist.
Yes, that terrifies me.
I have to confess that one time I think I was having a low day, and I asked ChatGPT if I was a good person.
Oh, wow. Okay, what did it say?
I cannot remember, but it basically said what I could find on the internet, which was yes. But I don't know. Obviously, I can't trust ChatGPT.
Exactly. I mean, I can say you are a good person, but still, like, and that's, I think, like, what emotional labor, what like a connection are we outsourcing? And, I have always been obsessed with movies like Terminator 2 and The Matrix, and like, so what, like, once we start projecting our humanity into something else, do we become less human, and does the machine become more human?
Well, I wanted to pick you up on that because you mentioned that you were obsessed with films like Terminator, The Matrix, covered the Terminator, obviously very seminal text from the 80s. Now we're in a moment in American cinema, the two films that we're going to cover and kind of the films that I'm talking about over the past and next couple of weeks are all a moment in time, particularly in American film, when the internet became the new boogeyman. And, before it was the internet, it was cyberspace and, VR. How do you feel about this moment of 90s tech horror?
It feels in some ways really naive, and then it feels in other ways really prescient. And you kind of look back and you think, well, why? We've known all of this for 20 years. Like, why are we still making the same mistakes? But I get swept up in like the floppy disk of it all. And it takes me right back to the Mac lab in middle school. We were playing Oregon Trail. So I love all of the optics of it, and just kind of that black background with the green or the white text. But it was also like, I feel like there was a distrust of it too. And, that kind of comes down on generational divide. Like, do I trust this computer to keep track of all of my information? And should I? And back then there was an alternative. Like now, so many things are automated and so many things are done through technology. Like it's really hard to exist without a phone at this point. But in the 90s, you were on the cutting edge if you had a cell phone. Like I remember Zach Morris's gigantic cell phone on Saved by the Bell. And I mean, I think we see in these movies, you're making the choice to use this technology, whereas your life doesn't depend on it the way it does now. So it felt almost a little more freeing to watch this. I was like, oh, we did used to write things down with our hands.
Do you know what's interesting going back to this particular period in particular? Because in my head, I had them almost as like these campy classics, right? With their floppy disk aesthetic and kind of quaint in a way, because our experience of the internet and technology and even things like virtual reality is an art form now. It gets exhibited at festivals, in museums. It's curated by archives. And, our experience of technology is so utilitarian. What it's really interesting is not just the aesthetical part, but it's how they try to identify the possible pitfalls, like the dangers, before the tech was even there. There's some things in both of the movies that we're going to talk about that are so scary today in 2025 at the point of recording this that were absolutely not scary when I first watched Virtuosity like 10-15 years ago. Were absolutely probably not scary in the same way in the 90s when these films were released, where you were just like, oh, that's just Hollywood being Hollywood, isn't it?
Yeah.
But now it's completely different. Even the language that they use, particularly in Virtuosity, I was like clutching my pearls, being like, I'm sorry, you predicted the whole conversation about teaching AI through that we're having right now?
Right, exactly. If we can learn what like information are you scraping and how is that being remixed and reconfigured and what comes out and who is in charge of maintaining that or monitoring it. And one thing I think is really interesting about both of these movies is we see a clear ghost or monster in the machine, a villain through technology, but we're also kind of presenting the arbiters of the technology itself, which is mostly like cops or bigger systems. We're presenting that as a machine also, and we're all kind of just cogs. And that's, I think, what I meant when I said, are we removing our humanity? Like if everything feels like a simulation and we're just trusting the wiring of the machine or the algorithm, then that removes our conscious, or it removes our need to make decisions. And so I was watching particularly Virtuosity, and I was like, oh, who are the villains, Or in Ghost in the Machine, when someone essentially gets swatted, and it's like the machine is the cops because they are part of a larger system and they don't question, they just do, like the computer would do.
So let's get into both of these films. Both of them merging serial killer narratives with tech horror.
Yes.
Two of my favorite things.
Oh my gosh, same. It was so nice to think about like a simpler time when serial killers were like the biggest villain we could think of, And I'm thinking before like 9/11 and before like torture porn, when we started really othering people and it started to get really dark and nihilistic. And here it's like, this Charles Manson, man, he's the worst we can think of.
Yeah, just like pop him into a big AI like washing machine, crank that shit up to 11, and let's spit out Russell Crowe in a purple suit.
Oh my gosh.
That's
I know.
The level.
With just like different serial killer personalities warring in his mind. Like I'm picturing them at like a swimming pool, and like some of them go to the surface and others go underwater. And it was just so much fun. And I mean, I am obsessed with true crime also. And so it was fun. It almost felt like the next movie that was put on after this was Copycat.
I have such a soft spot for Copycat.
I love it so much.
So tell me, where do you think both of these films, Ghost in the Machine and Virtuosity, I feel like we don't talk about them that much in kind of the horror circles. Where do you think their standing is currently?
I think they've almost been forgotten. Like, I think I had definitely seen both of them, but I hadn't thought about them for years. And I think they have fallen out of the conversation because I think on the surface, the tech looks really dated. And I think, and when you compare it, to be fair, when you're comparing it to something like Terminator 2, where the technology and the effects are just like incredible, they do look a little bit dated. But I think what both of these films do so well is it's not necessarily about the tech. It's what the tech can do and what we can do through the tech. And so the conversations that we're having, I find still very relevant. And, you know, I might be on a crusade to bring them back into public consciousness because I think they're still very relevant.
I've been on that crusade with Virtuosity for a while.
Is that the one you have the soft spot for?
Hell yeah. Because, listen, I years ago, when I was working at the British Film Institute, I pitched and curated a season which was all about this particular thing of like, what does the internet look like in cinema? How does internet culture and internet aesthetics translate into filmmaking? And it was called Raised by the Internet. And the one film that I constantly used to illustrate my point was Virtuosity. And I kept telling people, guys, there is a film from the 90s with Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe, where Russell Crowe is a slushie of Wikipedia pages of all the greatest serial killers of all time. And it's a thriller, but also it's ridiculous. And the internet is the bad guy. And AI is the villain. It's an AI-generated serial killer, and he's played by Russell Crowe. How is this not genius? Bring it back. I feel like it's coming back now because Vinegar Syndrome have put out a 4K restoration of it. And I'm like, this is how it begins.
Exactly. Yes, Virtuosity is good. Actually, I feel like the editorials are being written as we speak, and it is so fun. Like, and again, I think on a surface level, I could see elements of Terminator 2. I could see elements of the 100%. Terminator. I could see Demolition Man. But I still think it's doing its own thing. And it's it's almost like candy, where like there's something fun and interesting and wacky and weird in every frame, and the plot just goes in these crazy places. And it was a delight to watch this because I didn't remember very much about it, and Russell Crowe is just so much fun.
Well, Russell is getting a lot of love, a lot of it from me personally. Because of his recent horror turns in The Pope's Exorcist and The Exorcism. Possibly the only good thing about The Mummy, the attempted Dark Universe remake. But I feel like more love needs to be given to his role as Sid 6.7 in Virtuosity.
I mean, it's like a tour de force, you know, because Denzel Washington is doing what he's supposed to do. He's the straight man cop. He's trying to avenge his family. He's just trying to, he's just a straight man throughout this. And Russell Crowe is just like, he's not quite chewing scenery, but he's like bouncing off the walls. And he seems to be having so much fun.
I think it's also like a real introduction of himself. Because he was like really well known in Australia, but this is one of his first big US roles. And considering that he would make LA Confidential only 2 years later, 3 years later, this is a very different flavor of Russell that I think he's kept hidden until only recently.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think of him as like stoic gladiator, or in LA Confidential. And I think because of both of those roles, he kind of became known as like a quiet leading man who's just very like stony, but he's there. He's a protector. He's strong and quiet. And here he's just this flamboyant bad guy who's like bopping around trying to kill people on TV and getting mad when people take his feet away. And it's so much fun.
We're fully talking about Virtuosity. So let's just get into it.
Sorry.
Never apologize about that. What do you think of Sid 6.7 as a villain?
Okay, well, that is the highlight of the movie for me, 100%. I think. I thought this was so fascinating. One, it's just those kind of quaint effects when he is birthed out of like an egg sac kind of thing. I was
Loved it.
like, this is 90s cinema, baby. We're doing it. And
It's like
fun.
we're gonna do Alien, but it's Alien with a tech twist.
Exactly. And then he started playing the Symphony of Screams, which I thought was so fascinating. And I was like geeking out over the technology of that too. But I love how gleeful he is. Like, he is not apologetic at all. He is having so much fun being bad. And he's very dangerous. Like, he's going around killing people. And I think that he's so winky and charming that it's easy to overlook how extremely violent he is. But like, I think about that man who turns the channel and he just breaks his neck. And that guy's just dead. And he's enjoying suffering. And I think it's rare that we see a villain get to be that unabashedly bad without us trying to like find their humanity in any kind of way. And we're not really doing that here.
No, I think I greatly enjoyed Crow's performance here. It's completely absurd, but it's also he plays him very, very cruel. He's like a kid who deeply enjoys suffering and inflicting pain. The only thing that I felt was like, oh, this could be pushed harder even, was, when you say that we're not trying to find his humanity, the one thing that they try to justify is his obsession with Denzel Washington's character, right? This sort of disgraced cop who was accused of killing someone and who has this past relationship with one of the killers that is now has trained the AI of Sid 6.7. Bear with me here. But because this is a fictional serial killer, that is the human connection. So his obsession with Denzel's character is because in his past human life, he was obsessed with him and they have this prior relationship. That was the one thing, was like, if you wanted to go very, very cold, you just eliminate that completely. And Denzel Washington and everyone else is just another blood bag, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think when we think about machines too, like, if they're programmed to have compassion or not, there's the 3 rules where you can't harm a human. I think I'm probably butchering that. But I think it's this interesting mix of, because it's not just this one serial killer. And I feel like if it were just this one personality who has just kind of been reborn in Sid 6.7, in the same way that we see someone kind of reborn through technology in The Ghost in the Machine, if it were this one person, I feel like they might be weakened by their connection and by their like inability to let Denzel Washington's character go. But here we have this ability for him to just, and we don't see it as much. He still kind of remains this one serial killer, but there's always the possibility that Charles Manson could take over, who doesn't know Denzel Washington at all and could do whatever he wants. And so I think it's a really interesting threat. Like, he contains multitudes, but all the multitudes are killers.
I'd forgotten that it only really has that one moment where it taps into the fact that he contains multitudes of serial killers. There's the one moment where he recreates the La Bianca murders with the Charles Manson murders, and then nothing else. I'm like, oh, I thought we were going to play around with this idea a little bit more, but no, we didn't. We like the concept and then we abandon it immediately, which I think is more a trait of 90s film storytelling than studio storytelling than anything else.
I think so too. Yeah, there's part of me that was like, I would like a copycat version of this where we can play a little more with, like, what are the other serial killers in there? And, what else are we writing on the walls? And we pick the most iconic one to start off too. So it's almost like a shorthand for everything else.
I did find really fascinating and actually the scariest about Sid was how much of an exhibitionist he was. Yeah. He needs an audience. He needs a feed. And again, rewatching this year, I felt completely differently about that. What did you think of him as kind of a killer who needs an audience?
I agree with you. I think this is an element of the movie that's aged really interestingly, because when I think closer to the time period when this would have come out, I think more about like the Stephen King stories, like The Long Walk and The Running Man, and this kind of deadly entertainment. And do we care about human beings? Do we see people on TV as human beings anymore, or are they just blood sacks for us to kill? Because once they're on a screen, they have lost their humanity to us. And now I think I see it after we just like this week or last week, an influencer was killed during a live stream. I started Googling and I saw just these really horrific things. Like we've had people try to live stream murders. And so it just becomes this different thing. And, we also, when we have mass shooters, we try not to say their names now because we don't want to give them the notoriety. So there's this element of what are we watching and why are we so interested in this? And then I also think about, on the other hand, like the Black Lives Matter movement, where we're seeing people who are dying on camera, but it's important for us to have proof of that. So it's become so much more complicated right now.
Yeah, the technology is not actually, it's just a tool. It's just a mechanism. And actually, it's the way that it's deployed. Like, Sid is an interesting creature because he is made out of, bits and cables and technology. And he kind of feeds himself in practical levels off of he has this weird thing where he regenerates limbs by touching glass. Sure.
Which I loved.
I don't get it, but I love it.
Yeah. Yep. You get your goop on your suit and I'm down.
Exactly. But he's essentially technology, but he's not the reason that he's gone evil. It's because he has been fed only the worst of humanity. And then also, and this is a character I actually wanted to talk about, is there's Dr. Lindenmayer, who is essentially the Dr. Frankenstein of the film, who is the one who's most interested in seeing what he gets up to. He's very in the shadows as well, as opposed to Sid, who wants a big audience, who wants to be live streamed at all times.
Yeah. Well, and if we consider Sid a tool, then is all of this Dr. Lindenmayer? Like, he's the puppeteer and we just don't see him because, like you said, he's in the shadows. And I think it is really creepy. And something that we do see a lot in tech movies is who has created the tech and for what purpose. And there's often a difference between the purpose you tell us it's for and what your purpose actually is. And I think if you are the person in charge of putting limits on the technology, like I mentioned the 3 rules, and again, someone is yelling at me in their car right now, but like one of them is you can't harm humans. Like, well, what if somebody just deprograms that part, but you don't know? And who is responsible? So yeah, the Dr. Frankenstein connection, I think, is really scary because we're not just talking about one monster sewn together from body parts. We're talking about entire systems. Like, we don't really see Sid infect other machines, but I think that's definitely a possibility. And he is a synthesis of a lot of different things. And so it almost feels like the sky's the limit in the most terrifying way, because at the end of the day, we're all just human beings and whoever's in charge is a human being too.
And also, I think it's really interesting that Sid is essentially an amalgamation of 2 technologies. It's the AI that Dr. Lindenmayer has created and fed on the worst as a training tool for the police, but also the body, so the physical body of Sid, is the technology that was used to create a sex robot. That was obviously gendered female. So he's kind of combined this tech that he has created both for murder, institutionalized murder, and then also for sex work.
Yeah.
And or sexual slavery, I should say. Like if we get into that whole conversation about kind of can sex robots consent and does consent apply in that. But and I go back to Westworld in this, which I think is a really fun 70s, and then obviously with the TV series remake, kind of investigation of what do we use tech for when we can create something that approximates humanity. We use it to kill and we use it for sex.
Exactly. And both of those things we don't want to have to ask for. We want to just be able to do it. But those are things that require proximity and relationships with other people. And I think one of the dangers that this film kind of points out is, how do you know when you're in the real world, or when you're in, I'm going to say the Matrix because it kind of feels like we're touching that, but like, how do we know when we're in approximation, or when we're dealing with someone who is not, quote, real, but they look real? And if we get used to treating this person like we don't need consent, then it makes it easier to treat everyone else like they don't need consent either. It's conditioning us for a world where we don't have to do that emotional labor anymore.
And the other thing that it is about control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what's interesting is that Sid is not under the control of Dr. Lindenmayer pretty much as soon as he's birthed out of that goop cocoon. And I wonder, what do you think about the way that Virtuosity portrays AI that might be different from the way other tech horror, and not even horror, like the villain of the last 2 Mission Impossibles is AI as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is, again, one that, like, in some ways looks naive, but it also looks very, very relevant. And it kind of freaks me out that we were having these conversations in the 90s and we're still having the exact same conversations right now. And I think this one, to me, it feels like the regeneration piece of it, and the combining all of these different approximations of humanity, like regardless of whether they're serial killers or they're like nuns or something who do all good, the purpose is we're trying to capture a certain element of being human. Is it, if it were nuns, I just use it as an example, or teachers or something, that we would be trying to capture compassion and someone who could teach us things or guide us or like help care for children. But here, what we want is cruelty, and we want, control, and we want to, like, I don't know, kill other people and to lose our consciousness. Like, when I think about what defines a serial killer, I mean, there are technical definitions, but the serial killers we see here, it's like we don't care about humanity. We view other people's bodies as tools for our killing or our murder games. And so that's what we're trying to capture here. And it just makes me wonder what the purpose of Dr. Lindenmeyer's creation is. And then if we're thinking about this being a sex bot or was inspired by like sex bot technology, what is the purpose of having something break and then regenerate so quickly? The reason you want it to do that is so you can break it and there will be no consequences. And so it's such a fun performance, and it's such a like an outsized villain, but it points really disturbing fingers back at us.
It feels also like a good place to talk about Ghost in the Machine, because I also think that is a film that perhaps less knowingly points its finger back at us, even though ostensibly this is a much more straightforward serial killer thriller, serial killer die, with the twist that the serial killer dies quite early on in the film, but continues to harass his victim through the medium of all technology.
Yeah, there's one moment where they say, once something's on the internet, it's never gone. You can't delete it. And so we see this cruelty and this disregard for humanity, and this desire to make people suffer. We see it just perpetuated, and suddenly there are so many more tools at its disposal. And I think this one, I just had so much fun with this one. I had forgotten how much of a serial killer movie it is. Like it is tech, and we're playing with machines and how everything is connected, and the terror of machines turning against you, and also having all of your information, which is another thing that's terrifying now. But it's also like, it's kind of got serial killer, not haunted house vibes, but like, I don't know, there's a killer stalking me. Like it almost feels like a slasher in some ways, which is really fun.
I think Ghost in the Machine completely follows the blueprint of the slasher in the film, with that slight cyberspace spin to it. But it's interesting to me that Rachel Talalay, the director, also has a background as a computer programmer. That's what she did before she became a filmmaker. What are your thoughts on Carl, or the address book killer, who's the murderer in Ghost in the Machine?
So creepy. I love that we just call him out right away. Like, he is the creepy guy. He's the killer. We see a little bit of his first work, which reminded me a lot of Red Dragon.
Ooh, yeah.
That kind of vibe. So, and I think like that first really grisly scene where the family has just been slaughtered and there's blood everywhere in this house, I think that tells you a lot about who this killer is. And that's a very lo-fi, quaint murder too. So it's like once he becomes like sucked into the machine, he's got both sides of this. He's got the need to destroy the like quaint family home, but he's also got all of the technology capabilities at his fingers. And I think he's so gross, he's so vindictive, and there's no reason for it. Like, the thing that chills me about him is just like, these people are just names on lists to him. It's like he becomes obsessed with Terry, but everybody else is just a way to get to her, and he doesn't know who they are. They're literally a name on a list, and he's going to kill because he just wants to kill.
There's almost this there's like this desire for completion and efficiency where she's just a name on the list. The way that he comes across her is so pedestrian and everyday, and it's just because he can track someone down, because he understands computers when very few people do. And I think even the use of the address book as a physical notebook with little post-its and bits of paper sticking out here and there. And then at the same time, he's working in a computer store and they're selling her a digital address book. So there's this thing of like, I have something, I have extra tools that you don't have. And instead of helping, and instead of spreading kind of the knowledge of those tools, I'm going to use it for evil. I'm going to use it to stalk you. I'm going to use it to intimidate and scare you, toy with you before I murder you. And when he gets absorbed into the machinery, which is like I found that scene to be still like quite visually interesting, in the way that then the ghost is visualized when he appears, through these kind of blobs of light that look like a 1995 screensaver on a Windows, on a PC. I'm like, it's really interesting to me how Talali actually thought about visualizing an actual tech ghost. Because we're constantly doing that now, although now we have static. Now we, they're a computer screen freezing up, a Zoom screen freezing up. It's like all of these other things that we've learned to associate with technology gone wrong. But when we didn't really have that visual or that even the sound effects of that, it was just a complete blank slate.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll date myself, but I can hear the squeal when you would pick up the phone and it was like connecting you to the internet at the time. And I think when I look at Carl now, I see like avatars on Twitter or something. They're like approximations of humanity representing what we use our technology for. And we've come to interact with them as if they are human because we're just so used to it now. But it's a mask. And I think like if this is a slasher, then the computer is the mask that the killer is using, which I think is interesting. So fascinating.
That is really interesting. And also because we get these two sides of the computer nerd. We get the evil guy, which is Carl, and he's the killer. We know he's the killer. And also he is like, serial killer by numbers in a 90s movie. Like, he's creepy from the start. He's weird. He looks at her weird. His eyes are too bright. Everything is wrong with him.
He's like, stay away from him.
Yeah, he's like good looking in the wrong ways,
Exactly, yes.
And then you've got Bram Walker. Great 90s character name. Who is like the complete opposite. He's like this genius hacker in a menial job, but he's sort of benevolent. He's like a Robin Hood figure, and he's like much more accessible and is helpful and doesn't ask for anything in return. What do you think about these two sort of hacker figures that we get?
I think they feel to me in the year 2025, they feel like two sides of the same coin. And I think I say that having completely lost faith in a lot of our tech moguls now, you know, and not that I ever had a ton of faith to begin with, but I think we see, you know, I just read the Facebook whistleblower book. I can't remember what it's called right now, but it's fantastic. Careless People, that's what it's called. And so when you see what we're using these tools for and kind of just the petty humanity that is dressed up as altruism, I think I look at Bram here with a little less trust than I would have a couple of years ago. And I think he feels like a good guy here. And I like the idea of like a Robin Hood in tech. And in the same way that part of me is like, Anonymous, can you come hack some stuff right now? Can you help us out? You know? But I mean, I think especially in the States, we're seeing our information just completely swept up and we have no idea where it's going. And so I look at both of these men here and I think y'all are using this technology and I don't know what you're doing with it. I don't know what you're doing with my information. I don't even know what information you have. And so I was feeling Terry a lot more than anyone else in this film. Like, I don't know, maybe that pen and paper date book was okay. Maybe I don't need to automate everything.
I mean, I will always be a physical notebook kind of girl, but
same. I've got a physical pen and paper planner, even though I cannot write in cursive anymore. I've lost the skill. Yeah.
I'm writing a cursive right now as you talk. I'm making notes based on things you're saying. I love doing that. But there's two thoughts that I had while watching this film and hearing you speak. And it's, on the one hand, it's the extreme edges for both of them, right? And I think that has more to do with what you were just saying about kind of our digital gurus, right? And these big tech entrepreneurs and how we've come to make them into, you know, almost messianic figures. Like, just remember the way that people would talk about Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
And it's always extremes. It's never just like someone invented a cool tool, made a whole bunch of money, and then they run a successful company and it's fine and everything's going fine. It's like everything needs to be saving the world. Everything. It's this cult of disruption, right? It's like everything needs to be reinvented. You're the messiah, you're the guru, you're the savior, you're the, you know, the Khaleesi of like, I don't know, digital planners, right?
Yeah.
So there's that extremity. I think this film is interesting because it's kind of it's tapping into that without obviously knowing what was going to happen 20 years in the future, but in the way that both this good hacker and this bad hacker are like the extreme moral opposites.
Right. Well, and I think it poses the question, like, do either of these opposites actually exist, or is it always somewhere in the middle?
There's another thing that you also hinted at, which is actually, I think, the best thing about this film is how easy it is and how scary it is when people get their hands on your information if they want to.
Yeah.
I think there's a big, it's now part of online culture as well. Like I see this on TikTok and Instagram all the time. And in fact, a lot of people pride themselves on like, you know, it's like this girl thing to do, right? Just give me a scrap of paper with someone's first name and, you know, one letter of their mother's maiden name and you'll find all of their details online in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And there's so many things like that happen online, both for good and for bad. And I think it is really what this film hints at is this terrifying knowledge that anybody can find you, and once they find the right information about you, they can just keep on looking.
Yeah.
They can get in your house. They know everything.
Yeah, they can impersonate you. And I think we see the way all of the systems work together. And once he has become digified, I guess, or digitized, he has control over any piece of technology. And so it's this feeling of like, if my information gets into one system, then it's over and they'll be able to track me down. And I also think that's where having a female filmmaker kind of comes into play too, because we feel how uneasy Terry feels with all of this and just how protective she is. And she's also a single mother too. So she's not just protecting her information. Like she mentions Josh's medical documents at some point too. Like they can get into your life and completely turn it over. And I think when we're talking about two sides of this coin, I think there's this conflation with technical skill. And if someone knows how to do this, they know how to scan your date book and they can make your life so much easier. I just digitized everything and I saved you 5 hours today. There's this conflation with like goodness and benevolence. And well, if they are so smart, they know how to do this, they have created this system, surely they're going to use it for good, right? Like they will do good with this because that's what we want to believe. We don't want to believe that these systems will be turned against us because that's terrifying. But I think what we've seen over and over and over again is that these tech giants or tech geniuses are just human beings too. And so once they have your information, who is regulating what they do with it? And would you even know? Because if they've created a system that you don't know how to operate, then you're screwed.
What do you think, thinking about both Ghost in the Machine and Virtuosity here, what do you think both of these films tell us about the early 90s panic around tech and the internet versus the things that are still resonating today?
I think both of these stories are very male centric. And I think like we've kind of talked about how it feels almost quaint and nostalgic to have serial killers be the primary evil. But I think that situates us in a patriarchal world where the cops or the government are the good guys and the rogue criminals are the bad guys. And I think in the 90s, that was still kind of the world we were living in. Then in the 2000s, things started to shift and we started to think more globally. And I've already mentioned we started to really other people. But I think one of the conversations I'm seeing now that I'm really excited about is like the feminist element of AI and what does it mean to be human? And I know Barbie is not a machine. Barbie is a plastic doll, but I think there's a question there in that film. What does it mean to be real? And I think we see that with machines also in a way that here it's like the men feel like the real characters in this story. And then we have Terry who's like, I don't want to be involved in this. Like, I just want I want to go through my day and I want to survive, but it's just a very male world. And I think we still see that because most of our tech overlords are men, but I think we're starting to see a little bit of pushback and saying, well, why are you creating these systems and why is Alexa defaulted to female,
And what do you think about, we can get into slightly less existential questions and more of the fun floppy disk ones.
Yes.
How do you think these films visualize quote unquote cyberspace? Which already feels like such an old word. It feels like such a, I don't know, Gen X word.
Right, exactly. Like we're not talking about cyberspace anymore.
No, I think we should bring it back.
I think we should too. It does feel like a little safer than the shit that we've got right now, right?
Yeah.
Like, give me a floppy disk, give me some green on a black and gray checked background, and I'll be happy. Yeah, it's almost like it's very nostalgic. I was mentioning the Oregon Trail, but it brings you back to a simpler time where these big questions still existed. And, our safety and information and people that could hack and choose to be good hackers or choose to be bad hackers. Because, we've talked about Carl and Bram on opposite ends of a spectrum, but we could also talk about Bram and Lindenmeyer on opposite ends of a spectrum. Like that was what we were dealing with. And if they didn't have your information, you could still survive. But I love how it almost feels like it's been drawn like by hand, like it's the primary colors. It's so nice. And it is arguably dated. And if I looked at it with a cold eye, I definitely think I would prefer even films of this time period that did have better special effects. But it feels like you can clearly tell the difference when something is not real, in a way that it's hard to now.
Also, I have to say that I mentioned it a little bit before, this the imagination that it would take to even imagine what would a ghost in a computer look like. Like, how would we, what if the soul becomes electricity? You know, what is it? What control? You know, we have ghost narratives. We've had ghost narratives pretty much since we've been alive. But
right.
This is now thinking, it's like, oh, can we stay alive artificially in this way? And if someone is bad to the core, does this empower them in the same way that some, you know, a restless spirit will be able to like move things around? And all the like weird digital sausage things that Carl becomes eventually. It's just another way of trying to, I'm giving this film a lot more credit. But I think it's just trying to visualize something a story that we've been retelling over and over again, which is like what happens after we die, what happens to the soul, what happens to spirits, what can they do if they're angry. And this is just using trying to invent a completely different aesthetic for a ghost movie and a slasher movie at the same time. Arguably, it's trying to do too many things at once.
It does feel a little bit like eating candy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner at times, which is not necessarily bad if you don't do that every day. But I'm curious what you think about this moment at the end where his tentacles are kind of going into Terry and Josh's eyes.
I'm into it.
Yeah, me too. It almost feels like demonic possession, doesn't it?
It does, because also, I mean, this film is very flawed. It's not great.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, Rachel Talalay has made a lot of deeply flawed films. I have a very, very soft spot for Tank Girl. I love Tank Girl. Very flawed film with a stunning central performance, and it has like an anarchic vibe to it. What I've always liked about her work is that it has genuine moments of inventiveness and imagination that I'm like, yeah, nobody else had done that, and you're sort of tapping into something bigger from an interesting perspective. I feel like this film has almost too many digital aesthetics. It is going for a kind of really creepy way of visualizing this Carl's spirit, of him trying to technically possess other characters, of him then using just commonplace tech like microwaves and blenders to kill people, which, you know, we need to talk about at some point.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And then it has also these like silly like kids playing VR and having like seeing a sex bot's boobies on a proto-internet that I'm like, okay, that feels like maybe was the thing that kids in 1983 would be playing with, but I don't know. It just seems really, really quaint now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it has kind of a lo-fi, even though we are talking about tech and machines, there's kind of a lo-fi side to it. And I mean, I keep comparing it to Terminator 2 because Terminator 2 was in 92. So the technology existed. And here it almost feels a lot more grounded. Like this is the kind of technology I would have encountered, you know, and I wasn't putting on VR headsets, but I also wasn't like encountering monsters made of liquid metal, you know, that could like, you know, so it feels a lot more grounded in a lot of ways. And I agree with you. I think we're doing a little too much. I love when his digitized self is sucked out through the magnet. I think that's a really cool visual. I don't know how much sense it makes, but I love it.
None at all, but I'm into it.
Also, I was thinking about that Breaking Bad episode where they're yelling about the magnets, and I was like, magnets! They were doing it in the 90s too. So that's really fun. And I like that is a simple solution that I could have, I don't know if I would have figured it out, but I could use it if I found a big enough magnet, you know? So and we have Josh, and he's the one that kind of sparks it. And so there's like, Bram almost feels like he's kind of teaching Josh, or Will later, how to be this internet native in a way that Terry just kind of has no interest in.
There's also, you know, speaking about Virtuosity, which I think is a bit more sophisticated in some ways, particularly because Brett Leonard, the director, had also made Lawnmower Man already.
Oh, yes.
So he was kind of like, he has more budget here to play around with. So some of the ideas just have more money behind them. But there's a thing in common with these two films, which I think is why I love this era of studio filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't really care about the reason why some tech works. Like, what do you mean Sid gets can grow his limbs back as these weird blue tentacles when he touches glass?
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean? What does glass have? I don't understand. I'm sure somebody will correct me. You can write to me, but I just like, sure, why not? That tracks. Sure, you can like try to get your ghost digital tentacles into someone's face. Sure, you can then possess a microwave. That's the same as the cyberspace, is it? Sure, that'll happen through an MRI machine. Yes,
well,
it's all the same tech.
And it doesn't matter because we're just doing it. I love that too. There's a simplicity. And I think if we did start to pull on those threads, or if the filmmakers were starting to pull on those threads, we wouldn't get that microwave scene, which is so much fun. And my question is like, how is it in the kitchen only? Like, how far does that microwave power go? So there's just so many questions. And I mean, I also think about the Last House on the Left moment where I was like, that microwave wouldn't turn on if the door is open. It's not how microwaves work. But we don't care. And there's a freedom in not caring, especially for a movie that is so tech heavy. It's almost kind of daring us not to ask because the point is not how things work. The point is what we do with this, and like the larger questions of who is Sid, what does he want, and should we have people like Sid, and who can stop him?
Yeah, exactly. When they try to explain why something is working the way it is, it's when they lose it. When they really show the fact that, first of all, no one writing these movies actually understands. Like,
no.
Brett Leonard went to like one conference about VR and he's like, I'm going to write a movie about this. Heck, I'm going to write 2 movies about this.
I mean, to have the confidence to just go for it like that, you know?
Listen, I respect it. Give the man some flowers.
I know. I would like that confidence too.
I think it's a bit too bold to compare it to The Matrix, but some flowers, sure. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But in the spirit of silliness, what are your favorite ridiculous floppy disk aesthetic moments of both of these films?
Oh my gosh. I think, okay, well, I love the microwave moment. That was so much fun. I think I really was charmed by a lot of these set pieces in Ghost in the Machine. I really liked the pool cover scene, even though that is not a super
really good.
One. I know. And I was like, oh, they killed the dog? Oh my goodness. Okay, because I thought they killed the dog, they might kill this baby too. So when the little baby is crawling around in the kitchen, I was like, okay, so this is a high-tech kitchen where everything, like, I don't know how that dishwasher got so much water in it. It doesn't have to make sense. It's really fun. And it's like we're treating these like fun set pieces. And I have just watched a lot of Final Destination because the new movie is out and I love Final Destination. So it almost kind of has those vibes. It's like, death is the machine, and the machine, like if there's a machine around you, it's going to get you. It's going to find some way to get you, and you may not know where. And we see a little bit of that, I think, with Virtuosity, but the fun parts of Virtuosity for me is just the futurisms of it. It reminded me a lot of Demolition Man in really fun ways, but just how over the top it is and what this futuristic city looks like. And also the Scream symphony. That was really fun.
Well, I think what's interesting is that Virtuosity takes itself a little bit more seriously, and it doesn't, like, all of the kill set pieces are based on Sid, and it's like, Sid's powers are not really that defined, but they are, it all comes back to him. I think the best parts of it is probably less campy, but more, like, genuinely well made, is the first scene when it's a little bit jarring because people blink in a slightly wrong way. They sort of glitch a little bit. And after the scene is over, you realize that this was all VR. And it's a much more, I think, sophisticated way of presenting what VR could be like, what a simulation could look like. And also, to echo something you've been saying through our conversation, it's like how it can be used on a major institutional level.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is not some kids or rogue genius inventor. This is a contractor working for the police force using an imprisoned man as a living test subject.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And okay, the part that really chilled me was finding out that there's poison in this implant that they put him in, because that's the moment where I was thinking, okay, well, the good guys aren't good either. There is no good guy. And I think what we see in both of these films is we kind of have to be the good guys for ourselves. We can't depend on these larger systems to be altruistic and to have our best interests at heart, because we live in a capitalist patriarchal world, and that's just not reality. But what we can do is we can choose how we engage with them. And so, yeah, that moment was just really chilling. And I think there's another moment when Parker Barnes dies. And I think at that moment, you don't know that they're in the simulation. And then all of a sudden his blood just kind of gets sucked back in. And I thought, okay, so now, like, I see comparisons to The Matrix. You know, I agree with you. I think it's a bold, like, they're not comparable movies by any means, but there are seeds here. And I can see where this idea of how can we tell what's real and what's not, and if everything we see around us is fake, then who's controlling what we see, who's controlling what our reality is. And that's something we see with AI right now too. If our, like, who is controlling what we search for, and the answers that come up when we Google something, and even just to use that term is technology loaded. But like once we lose control, like public control of our information, it makes it a lot easier to start shaping reality into something that we want it to be rather than something that it actually is, which is really scary.
And the other question, and I think Virtuosity doesn't really explore it in the same way as The Matrix does. The Matrix does it a lot more explicitly. It's like, who does this tech serve?
Yeah.
What is the purpose of SID? There was another 6 versions of SID before 6.7. Was deployed. There's so many versions of the sex robot that they've deployed. This is what does that contract look like with that company? What is the deal that they've made with the prison? You know, are they trying to develop like a RoboCop? Because that's also kind of what RoboCop was hinting at in its own way in the 80s.
Well, and who does it serve and who does it use to serve that purpose? Also, like, who matters in this equation? Because when you mentioned, this is the 6th iteration, it made me think of Alien, I think it's Resurrection, where we see all of the different clones of Ripley too. And you see what those earlier iterations looked like. And it's really chilling. And that's where I think there's a feminist and classist argument. Like, who do we actually care about serving, and who will we sacrifice to make that happen?
So before we start wrapping up, Jen, what do you think both Virtuosity and Ghost in the Machine would look like today if they were remade?
Ooh, I think they would be outright terrifying. Like,
they would just be documentaries.
Exactly. I mean, you know, we're joking, but maybe that's closer to the truth than we would like to admit. I mean, I think I could see a version of Virtuosity now of people who live online, and maybe not necessarily in virtual spaces, but like when I first started writing and I was writing for online magazines, I did not consider something actually published until it had been posted on Twitter. And it took me a while to actually admit that that's what I was doing, but that's when it became real to me. And I think there's a whole subset of people out there who their reality is created by these cultivated online spaces. And it's dangerous because they've lost track of what actual reality is. And then the stakes start to disappear, the humanity starts to disappear, and it starts to be acceptable to treat people in awful ways. And so I think that's what Virtuosity would look like. I think the Ghost in the Machine, I mean, honestly, would look a lot like what we're leading up to right now. No information is safe. Like, the amount of trainings I have to go to for my day job about how to protect our information and how many password authentications and like the sophisticated ways that people have of sending phishing emails right now. I think it would look a lot more like that. And I think we would start to explore like the deadly consequences of that. Like this is before swatting was a thing, I believe. And that's what we see here. We see the arm of the law turned against this family because they're able to infiltrate the system. And it's really, really haunting. And I think ahead of its time, considering what we're seeing now.
I think Ghost in the Machine, first of all, should be remade. Because
I would love that.
I think the way that information online and the dangers of it, and especially stalking and online stalking, and the way that is not how stalking victims are not protected and not believed, and the burden of proof is very much on them to endure and document the stalking activity. I think there's something that could be done in a really, really chilling and interesting and contemporary way if you mix like proper supernatural tech horror with the realities of being stalked or being a stalker as well. But to bring it back to silliness, I would love to see an actual, here's a mishmash. Here's an AI that was only fed Wikipedia entries on serial killers and true crime podcasts. Give me that. Give me a proper digital tech horror version of Copycat. What are you going to do if Sid 6.8 is unleashed and he's doing a best of let's go global, man. Not just your American serial killers, not just Charles Manson and Jeffrey Dahmer and Ed Kemper and all the big hitters. Give me some Chikatilo. What is that going to look like? It's going to be awful. It's going to be horrible, but I kind of want to see it.
Well, and how does the digitized world now respond to that too? Because now I'm thinking, what if we got an AI podcast that was recapping everything, or like AI internet sleuths investigating this serial killer too? Like the possibilities are endless. This could be a show, not just a film.
What are people trying to like capture and document and stream his murders? And he's into it as much as Sid 6.7 is into it. Considering that, I mean, we're both kind of part of it, considering the amount of shows, channels, podcasts, articles, websites, Netflix and Prime documentaries that are being created in the true crime space. I mean, there'd be a live show happening just documenting his murders.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay, now I kind of think we need to write this show.
I mean, YouTube recaps of, the 43 things you missed in Sid 6.8's recent murder.
Wow.
Easter eggs.
Yes. Ooh.
I think we're cooking here.
I think we are too. We're sitting on a gold mine.
Nobody steal this idea. We're going to put it out into the internet and no one is allowed to steal it. You cannot trade AI on this idea.
No.
Jen, thank you so much for your time and as always for your insight. Is there anything about either one of these films that you wanted to touch on that maybe we haven't covered?
I think I've said most of what I want to say. I think I just was really charmed by both of them. It brought me back to a simpler time in my life, which maybe not a simpler time in the world, but it was just really nice. And I think Ghost in the Machine is a lot more spooky than I think I was expecting. And I really had a lot of fun with both of these.
Excellent. I really hope that more people discover them.
Me too. Yeah.
I really think both these films really deserve to be talked a little bit more. They're not great capital G.
Right.
But they've got some really interesting ideas and the aesthetics are real goofy sometimes.
Yes. And that's fun too,
And it's
like warts and all,
It's fun to be scared about something that is not literally happening today.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Like I can be scared about this and also marvel at the 90s fashion, which Josh and his music and his, like, when he tucks his shirt into his boxers, I was like, this is living in the 90s. It just brought me straight back. So I can immerse myself in that while I'm terrified about somebody getting all of my information.
And the only thing that I want to say before we wrap up is Russell Crowe's purple suit. Just
It's fantastic.
Just very good. Just very good. Very good job.
I mean, that's a Halloween costume, you know? You put some kind of silvery goop on it, you know? That'd be fun.
I mean, the character, Sid committed to a style.
Yeah, exactly. He went for it.
Yeah, he was doing, like Bruno Mars meets White Prince in the 90s before anyone had the balls to attempt it. Did he pull it off? Probably not. But listen, we appreciate a try.
Exactly. He did not pull it off, you know?
Yeah, it's
fun.
He's doing something.
That's true.
That's all we can ask.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I'm just now looking at pictures on IMDb. It's just great.
I know.
It's such a great color purple, too.
Jen, thank you so much again.
Oh,
and
thank you. This was so much fun.
Always extremely fun to talk to you. And
yes.
Please, can you let the listeners know where they can find more of your work online?
Yes, you can find me at Jim Ferratu. I will post everything. If you want to hear me talk more about serial killers, you can find me at the Murder Made Fiction podcast, which is a podcast where we analyze fictionalized adaptations of true crime stories. So like the movies and TV shows that are based on the stories. And then you can hear me talking about Stephen King on the Losers Club podcast. You can hear me talking about superheroes on the Girls and the Boys podcast. And you can hear me talking about women and female villains on the Ladykillers podcast. And Anna joined me for an episode on possession. So you should definitely check that out.
Yes, I did. And it was extremely fun.
It was super fun. And I hope to have you back soon.
Anytime.